Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited to be here on this panel in honor of International Democracy Day. That was not today. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to you guys on the exact day, but we're really excited to be talking about the state of democracy here in Florida and calling out some of the challenges that we have in our state. So first, want to start with introductions. So hi, I'm Bernice. I'm the regional director with For Future Florida in West Central Florida. So Tampa and St. Petersburg. Shout out to y'all. I would love to introduce our guest next, which Kristen from Equal Ground. We are so grateful to have you on today. How are you doing today, Kristen? And can you share a little bit about your work with Equal Ground?
Sure. Hello, everyone. So excited to be here. My name is Kristen Fawali Thomas, and I'm the Managing Director for Equal Ground Education and Equal Ground Action Fund. We're a Black political organization working to engage and empower Black voters here in the state. So our work centers in the Afro Quarter, so Orange County, Volusia, Seminole, and Pinellas County. And we do work around voter education, voter registration, legislative work, building Black political power through leadership development, and things like that. So I'm really excited to have this conversation and looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristen. And next, I'd like to introduce the lovely Diana from Dream Defenders. How are you doing today, Diana?
Hey, Bernice. Thanks so much. My name is Diana. My pronouns are they, them, and I am the lead organizer in Tampa for Dream Defenders, which is a Florida statewide Black youth-led member-based organization that does community organizing, both inside state power and creating our own alternative systems to organize communities against police and prisons. So we're an abolitionist, Black feminist organization, and I'm super happy to be here representing this great group and our Tampa squad, which Bernice is part of.
Yes, that is what I do in my spare time, y'all. More organizing work. So last but certainly not least, we have my colleague David, also from For Our Future. How are you doing today, David?
Hey, I'm doing really good. Here to represent our folks in East Central Florida. So greater Orlando area, all the way out to the Space Coast. Really glad to be here and look forward to talking about what's going on with democracy in Florida.
Awesome. So we're going to get right to it and talk about the state of democracy in Florida. And we're going to start with this real heavy reality, which is Floridians have less rights than they did in 2020. This legislative session was horrible on our families and our communities here in Florida. And Governor DeSantis has taken so many anti-democratic actions that have impacted our rights, our voting rights, and our rights to protest are what we're going to focus on today. But I'm sure, looking at the panelists, I'm sure there are plenty of other things that have been disrupted by DeSantis. Okay, so we're going to jump right in to talking about SB 90. Kristen, do you want to give us a quick overview of the bill?
Sure. Before I go into the bill, I want to be clear about the intentions of why SB 90 came about. This is strict voter suppression that was an agenda for states across the country, so not just Florida, which is very interesting because the election of 2020 was one of the most very easygoing election cycles. We had no issues. In fact, those of you who work in this space for a while, you know that election night, it typically doesn't end on election night. We are always anticipating days and days of follow-ups and recounts and things like that. And the election was called the night of election night, which means that there weren't any major issues. Which is also interesting because Governor DeSantis actually called this election and thought that our state should be used as a model for the nation. because there was no evidence of issues, because we didn't have no issues. But the issues are that voters turned out at a higher rate. Black and brown voters turned out at a higher rate. Drop boxes were used. The vote by mail ballots increased, and so this is, was used as an agenda to suppress our vote. So I just want to be very clear as to how we got here and why we're here. But nonetheless, SB 90 passed in the legislature this past legislative session, and it covers three different sections of the bill. So it affects election officials, it affects voters, and it affects third party organizations like Equal Ground. So for officials, the bill says that you can no longer automatically send vote by mail request forms. Previously to this bill, a lot of SOE offices, a lot of our friendlier SOE offices would send applications to voters across the state or within their county just asking if they wanted to sign up for vote by mail. I know because our organization did some chasing to be sure that folks knew, especially last year during the pandemic. And so that is no longer allowed under this bill. It also requires that drop boxes must be monitored by SOE officials. And so that means for organizations like Equal Ground, who hosted Souls to the Polls events, and we would have election officials drop off boxes so that folks can drop off their vote by mail ballots. And sometimes they would say, sometimes they would leave, but please, it's a secured box, so you can't get in it. That is no longer allowed, which will limit drop boxes and the availability of them throughout our counties. As it relates to our voters, for now, vote by mail request forms have to be signed up every year. I will say if you did sign up in 2020, then you are grandfathered in for 2022. However, otherwise, you have to request your vote by mail ballot each year. This creates a problem because most voters don't think to check their vote by mail status, and they will be waiting and thinking that a ballot is coming to their home when it's not, and it could possibly be too late for them to sign up for a vote by mail request form. So that is an issue. And then you'll need specific IDs requirements for your vote by mail or your last four of your social. So this is also new. It also limits the amount of ballots that someone can turn in to the supervisor of elections. And so this is important for some of our elder communities that I know a lot of people pick up a lot of ballots in nursing homes or for their people with larger families just because it's more accessible, and you are no longer allowed to do that. You can only drop off your ballot and two immediate family members. And then for third party organizations like folks on this call, we're no longer allowed to give food and water to voters in line. This is a huge issue. I know that when I actually worked for Our Future in 2016, we took pizza and, well, this is also pre-COVID. We took pizza and snacks and water and things like that to people standing in line because you're standing in line, hot Florida sun. And we want to be sure that people have an opportunity to eat and not pass out and things like that. And so unfortunately, that is no longer allowed due to SB 90. It also raises fees and costs for our organizations depending on the type of programming we run. We also must give a disclaimer for voter registration. So if we are doing voter registration and we come across a voter, we have to now verbally tell them that this ballot or this application may or may not make it to the SOE office within 14 days. And so I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound reassuring to anybody giving their personal information to really a complete stranger. So this is just another barrier to stop organizations and progressive groups to do widespread voter registration programs. And then we also are no longer allowed to do a lot of recruiting or voter registration in other counties. So we used to be able to do voter registration, if you were doing something in Orlando, the likelihood of someone who lives in Sanford, which is in Seminole County, you registering them is high. And so we could register them, turn them into the Orange County SOE, and they will be able to process and get it to the correct supervisor of elections office. Now we're no longer allowed to do that. We have to now bear the cost of mailing or driving those Seminole County or whatever county voter registration applications to the respective counties. And so it just creates this huge barrier and just a lot of techniques that stop us from registering folks to vote, making voting accessible because we are still living in a pandemic. I just want to be very clear. And so we're not sure when it will all be over. And so being able to access drop boxes and vote by mail ballots was extremely easy and accessible and beneficial to a lot of voters last year. And so they made that a little difficult. I do want to say that groups like the folks who are on the call and other progressive and faith leaders across the state during legislative session really lifted up our voices and our concerns around SB 90. And while this bill resulted, it still is horrible. It was worse, if you could imagine. So originally they were going to wipe out vote by mail. Anybody who was signed up for vote by mail, they were going to wipe them out completely. They were going to remove drop boxes completely. And there were a lot of groups on the ground that held press conferences that met with Senator Baxley, who was the sponsor of the bill, who really just sent letters, sent emails, made phone calls to our legislators, really urging them to make changes to this bill. So I will say that because of our work of a lot of groups on the call and groups on the ground, because we lifted our voice, it got a little better, if you can say that, but it's still bad. And so what Equal Ground has been doing this summer, we printed these cards that just gave voters an update on what those changes are. Because we have municipal elections this year, they will be the first voters to participate through SB 90 laws. So we want to be sure that folks are educated and up to date on the changes of their voting rights so they can be prepared and know what to expect as they go to vote this year. So that's SB 90. There are a few lawsuits out there. So be on the lookout. It could be overturned. Not sure what that's going to look like. And we're also hearing that they might try to, there are some legislators that wanted to see if they can get some funding for education around this, because one of the issues with SB 90 was they just passed it, but there wasn't additional funding given to SOE offices or third-party organizations to do any education. So they just made laws and then voters have no idea that their laws have changed. And so I did hear that some legislators are trying to fight for that, but I don't want to get too excited about that because I'm not sure where that's going to go. But we just really need to educate our community so they know about these changes and be prepared as they go to vote. And that's it. That's all I have.
Thank you so much, Kristen. I don't think anyone could have done a better job of explaining it because it's a really, if you look at it on paper, it's really complicated. So thank you so much for explaining it in plain English so we could understand what it is. And, you know, I want to say that I'm shocked, but I'm not shocked because the reality is that we know how our governor acts. And it's unfortunate that our like voting rights are being like played with by this governor.
Yeah, 100%. And one thing in the course of like the advocacy that we put forward on SB 90 is that this was really a solution in search of a problem, which, you know, once again, we just didn't have. And in conversations I had at the doors over the phones with voters, it's the fact is that you know, we troubleshot a problem with voting in Florida a while ago in 2001. There was a lot of responses to how the 2000 election was executed in Florida, and so this was really just Trump appeasement. The let's do something that we can put on the books that will, you know, suppress votes and also keep Trump happy. Knowing that he was very, very upset with how the election turned out. so that was a huge part of the push, and recognizing that this is really just really born out of the derangement that all these votes are fraudulent or things like that, which was absolutely not the case in Florida. And then this was really just pushed along partisan lines.
Absolutely. And I think that it just means that groups like the folks who are on the call just have to fight harder and continue just to apply pressure as much as we can, understanding what the leadership looks like. So we just have to continue to do as much as we can, which what is within our power is to do education so that voters are so they have an understanding of what to expect, while we're also trying to fight back against these voter suppression laws.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we're going to move to our next piece of undemocratic legislation here, which is HB1. And I want to invite Diana, because Diana did a lot of work around HB1, just to share a little bit of like what the law is, and talk about the efforts that were made to push back against it.
Thank you, Bernice. Yeah, being, a Black and Brown led abolitionist organization, House Bill 1 was so much of the work we did across the state this last year. At this point, probably most people are familiar with it, but House Bill 1 was this super broad, far overreaching bill that was Ron DeSantis's #1 legislative priority for this last legislative session. So generally, House Bills 1 through 10 are the governor's priority, and this was literally House Bill 1, which you would want to be, this uniting thing. You would want it to be ideally something that's bipartisan, that brings people together, that's really doing good for people. But instead, our governor decided to strip people of their First Amendment rights. And actually lots of other rights, as has recently been ruled by a judge. But I am going to drop a really wonderful two-pager from the ACLU that goes in depth about all of the different parts of the bill, because it's so broad and covers so many things. But some of the things that it does creates a whole new slew of felonies, mostly connected to the right to protest. So there's all of these things about if you have 3 or more people and they're acting with malicious intent, or if you're blocking a road, all of these things can get you arrested. Totally different definitions of things like disorderly conduct, property damage, and things like that. So it's very unclear. It's very broad, and was very difficult to interpret. But there's, what we do know is that there's all of these new felonies that people can be charged with while they're exercising their right to vote. And it gives the police way more power to call something a riot. And once any gathering has been called a riot, people can be rounded up fairly quickly and charged with very serious penalties. But it goes beyond that as well. It created new crimes like mob intimidation. Even if a gathering isn't deemed a riot, it could be deemed mob intimidation, which carries a penalty of up to a year in jail. But there's no definition for things like, what does it mean to threaten, or what does it mean to use force? So it's entirely up to basically the discretion of the police officers on the scene. It creates new crimes about doxing, and it also protects monuments. So this was one of the most egregious parts of the bill to me. We have so much discourse in this country, and especially in the South where we're organizing, about the vestiges of racism that we still have outside of, even in Tampa, we've had protests about Confederate monuments and things like that. And under this law, if you cause damage to a monument, just in general, and it can be any historic monument or memorial or anything like that, you can go to jail, you can go to prison for up to 5 years. And if you destroy it, or if you tear it down, you can go to prison for 15 years. For tearing down like a Confederate monument, you can go to prison for 15 years. And at the same time, while the bill is creating all of these new rules to protect monuments, it is further endangering protesters by actually making it illegal to hit a protester with your car, even if you kill them. So if basically if you're in a protest and you're blocking a road and someone runs you over with their car, under this law, it's very hard for them to be held liable for manslaughter or murder if you're blocking a road. So under this law, the Confederate monuments have more rights than people protesting, and the lives of people have been so invalidated by this law. And it goes beyond all of these things. It also touches on home rule. So home rule is this idea that the body that collects those taxes, right, if it's your city taxes or your county taxes, they get to decide based on, you know, the people that they represent in their jurisdiction, how to spend those tax dollars, right? So your city council decides how to spend the budget. Your county commissioners decide how to spend the county budget. But this actually, in a huge overreach, makes it so that they can no longer do that when it comes to the police budget. So if your police department, you know, if you're doing a defund campaign or something, or just if, you know, your city council members decide, actually, we have some other priorities this year in the budget, and they reduce the police budget by even $1, even one cop car, that municipality can now be sued and held accountable for, with no ceiling on how much they can be held accountable for anything that happens as a result of that reduction in police budget. So basically it makes it so that you cannot, your municipality that you pay taxes to does not have the power anymore to decide how to allocate that budget. And there's lots of really horrifying things that have come up around that about, you know, what if they were awarded a grant, or what if, you know, there was funding given to a specific program, or what if we decide to move a program that was once under the police department to maybe the public defender's office or something. All of those things can now get your municipality in hot water, just to avoid any change to the budget. You know, nothing like that for other budget priorities, but for police budgets, now the governor's office is able to determine that you're not allowed to defund the police in your municipality even a little bit. So lots of really horrifying things in there. And something that is equally horrifying is not just that this was a bad bill, but that Floridians were very loudly against this bill. So I was actually at the only Senate committee hearing that it got, and there were over 80 people who came out in the middle of a pandemic to give public testimony in like a physical indoor room. And of the, I think, 83 people who were there to speak on HB1, not one person was in favor of it. Like every single person who took time out of their day, and some of the biggest organizations and the most prominent faith leaders in Florida were there. No one even believed in the bill enough. Like no one was like, this will improve my life so much, that they made time out of their day to come and speak in the Senate hearing. All 83 people were speaking against the bill. We also sent out, at Dream Defenders specifically, and lots of organizations were working on this, but just in Dream Defenders alone, we actually sent out over 4 million emails that people, through like our Every Action form, filled out and sent emails to their legislators. So 160 Florida representatives and senators received cumulatively 4,800,000, so almost 5 million emails. When we saw that number, we were like, we actually have to double check that was the right number. Did really that many emails got sent? And yes, it was almost 5 million emails only through our organization. That's not counting every other organization that worked on it. And over, we heard senators and representatives saying, I literally have like a folder in my inbox of just people who are speaking out against House Bill 1. So there were phone banks, Dream Defenders alone, over 200 people phone banked with us. We made over 3,000 calls to legislators. And a lot of those calls were patch throughs where we were phone banking And when someone would answer, we would explain the bill to them and then ask if we could transfer them to their legislator, which is a patch call, where then that person gets directly connected to their legislator so they can leave a message. So we did hundreds of those. I mean, really, people turned out en masse to come out against this bill, and it still passed on party lines. Like only one or two, or only very few Republicans flipped. Passed on party lines with very little discussion. I mean, it was so demoralizing to hear 83 people speak and share their testimony, and then basically just watch Republicans be like, I don't even feel the need to comment on these testimonies. I'm just going to vote yes. So really, really defeating campaign. But of course, as expected, because this is so obviously an overreach of our constitutional rights, multiple lawsuits were filed, including Dream Defenders in coalition with some other Black-led organizations filed a lawsuit that actually has had not a small win, but not a complete win. And I will drop actually the 90-page judge's statement on it that was basically recently a judge ruled that the riot part of HB1 is too vague and is not enforceable. So there's an injunction right now on the riot part of the bill that applies to protests. So the rest of the bill is still fair game and lawsuits are still ongoing. We at Dream Defenders are certainly still in this lawsuit. But yeah, literally Dream Defenders versus Ron DeSantis has had, a small win because it is so apparent that this part of the bill overreaches and takes away people's ability to engage in the democratic process through the very long tradition of protesting. So it's 90 pages, and I thought it was going to be all legal jargon, and it actually wasn't. So if you have some time and you're interested in skimming through it, I really suggest reading through what the judge had to say about it. But yeah, that's I think that's the long and short of the bill, and that's where we're at now. It's really important. Thankfully, protesting is a little bit safer now because of this injunction, but certainly there's a lot of work to be done to undo the damage that this bill has caused and will continue to cause for a very long time.
Thank you so much, Diana. And, I remember one of the provisions that got struck down in the bill before it was passed was this idea that people who remove police budgets, they could actually get removed from office, was part of it. And then they decided no, we're just going to sue them instead. So, it's extremely undemocratic in nature.
Yeah, much like SB 90, this bill was infinitely worse when it was proposed, which really just says something. When you look at the final product and how terrible it is, the intent behind the bill and what it was, if the governor and if Republicans had gotten their way, it would have been much, much more of a nasty bill and so much more, so much worse even than the terrible result that we got.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I'm super happy with the judge's decision. I think it's clear that this is unconstitutional. People have a right to protest. That's how this country was literally founded, right? Let's look back at the Boston Tea Party. I think there's a difference between the people who are protesting now than there were back then, which is now we have people of color protesting, and now they're being criminalized for practicing their First Amendment rights. So I think that was part of the intent, because this came right after the George Floyd movement and all of the protests that came out. So to me, it feels targeted towards Black people and brown people specifically.
Yeah, this was absolutely, in the face of national uprisings, the largest national protest movement that we've seen in the history of our country last summer. This was the governor's solution. And it was the worst one in the country. Many other states also had some anti-protest bills that came out. But this was by far and wide the worst bill. And we know, we can still see that DeSantis's priority really is to increase the presence of policing in our communities. We've seen HB 11 for this upcoming session has already been filed, which is really terrible. I've been learning some more about that. So that's, certainly going to be a fight for next legislative session. Even things like, the $1,000 checks that got sent out. Like, my partner's a paramedic, and I was on Ron DeSantis's Twitter because I try and stay aware of, what he's talking about and anticipate things. And like, teachers and like medical first responders, like paramedics, got these checks that are, I believe, the result of the CARES Act, but that lots of people decided to call DeSantis checks. But his whole Twitter was just him giving them to cops. Like, that was, he didn't even talk about, giving them to teachers and giving them to paramedics. The people who got us through the pandemic, like literally the medical professionals who got us, are still getting us through this pandemic. But it's fascinating to see how DeSantis rightfully, understands that what his base wants to see is him like giving $1,000 checks to cops more than even what should unite all of us, which is, the medical first responders and teachers who are risking their lives to educate our children. So yeah, really scary to see like this is not the end of his crusade to bring more police and prisons to our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we hop off today, I want to invite Kristen and Diana to share, like, how can people stay connected with you and your organization?
Sure. So I'll go first. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And actually, I will put that in the chat. So Facebook, Equal Ground FL, and let me put all of that in the equal.ground on Instagram, and then Equal Ground FL on Twitter. You can also, I'll put the our website in the chat as well. We have a breakdown of SB 90 that people can go and see, that if you want to read it for yourself and find out additional information. We're also a part of the lawsuit, so we'll be providing some additional information once all of that is done and clear. So I'm going to put our Instagram, but please stay connected to us on social media, and let us know if you need anything. My email address is there.
And for Dream Defenders, like I said, we're a statewide organization, but we are led by local chapters. So Bernice and I are part of the Tampa squad. And we do statewide work together, but we also do local campaigns and local base building. So right now we're in the middle of a listening project in Tampa. So we're going out into predominantly Black communities and doing deep canvases, which are much different and much more fun than your traditional canvases where you're just checking boxes. And the goal is really to hear, what would safety look like in your community? When do you feel safe? When do you feel unsafe? And really uncovering these maybe subconscious ideas that we have about the connection between policing our communities and safety in our communities. So we have an active chapter here in Tampa. And if you're interested, please, by all means, shoot us a message on our Facebook or shoot me an email. And we'd love to see more of you. We'd love to get more folks involved. It definitely requires people power to defeat bills like this in the future. And we already know that we are going to have to start this fight again in the next legislative session.
Well, thank you so much. To stay in touch with For Our Future, before I let y'all go, join our Facebook groups. We have Facebook groups for every region we're in. So West Central Florida has their own, and David has one in East Central. We also have a South Florida, and they're a great way to stay connected with us. We post where all the work that we're doing and just ways to join, volunteer opportunities. So I definitely encourage you to join one of our Facebook groups if you're available. And just want to give a big thank you to the incredible Kristen and Diana for being on today. Thank you for taking time out of your day to be here. We appreciate you so much, and like the knowledge that you shared with us in the community. So thank you so much. Really grateful to have you on.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. All right, y'all. Well, it has been an amazing afternoon talking about how terrible DeSantis is. But we have hope. We have next year. So get engaged. Now is the time to start getting engaged for the gubernatorial race. So if you have questions about that, feel free to reach out to me and David via Facebook groups. We are very, very happy and willing to help you support to get started. Thank you so much, everyone. And I hope you have an amazing weekend. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Happy Friday, y'all.